Good morning. I'm Dr. Deborah Watson, Innovation Manager at Business West, and I'd like to welcome you to Innovating to Net Zero. If you are new to us, Business West is a B Corp offering business support to start-up and growing businesses in South West England. And I shall share more information on how you may be eligible for support at the end. Over 4 weeks leading up to Net Zero Week in July, this series looks at key challenges and opportunities that innovative businesses are facing on their road to net zero. We cover strategy, legal requirements, sustainable finance, winning and retaining business, and finally communicating your net zero message to your workforce and customers. Innovating to net zero is about how you can have green, responsible growth for your innovative business. A little bit of quick housekeeping for you. If you want to ask our speakers a question, please add them to the Q&A section. And we are recording the session today, so if you want to watch back parts later, you can. This morning, we look at meeting the legal requirements of net zero emissions. Also, we'll be looking at strategy, behaviours, and how much impact these will have on business. So today, I'd like you to welcome Aisha Stewart, Net Zero Business Advisor at Business West. Aisha has supported communities, governments, and businesses to make a shift towards a healthier and sustainable future. Good morning, Aisha.
Good morning. I'll just get my slides set up. All right. Hopefully everyone can see that all right.
Yeah. Can indeed. I'll leave it to you.
Great. Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining this morning. As Deborah mentioned, this is the first webinar of the Innovating to Net Zero series. For today's webinar, we'll be focusing on what net zero means for business, breaking down what the UK net zero strategy says about decarbonisation for businesses, specifically looking more at SMEs, and what are some of the benefits that come from taking action on climate. As mentioned, please use the chat to ask any questions you have, and we'll get into some of those questions in the Q&A section at the end of today's webinar. So here's just a bit of a run through of the topics I'll be covering this morning. So talking very briefly on kind of the climate crisis, really defining and highlighting the why and the purpose of this work and what we're trying to achieve. Discussing what are the drivers for businesses taking action on net zero, quickly kind of highlighting some of the priorities that are included within the net zero strategy and what it means for businesses and what support's available for business as part of that. Talking very briefly kind of around creating an action plan and kind of the essential information that's needed to be able to do that, and then showcasing a little bit of what we're doing here at Business West as an example. But just before I get stuck in, I'll do just a quick introduction to myself. So as Deborah mentioned, my name's Aisha. I am the Net Zero Business Advisor at Business West. My role involves me working with some of our members, as well as other businesses across our region who are getting started on their carbon reduction journey or have already started and looking for a bit more support on their journey. I deliver workshops to businesses to help them get started and help them understand some of the jargon that tends to exist within this space, and providing some one-to-one support to help them along their journey as well. I have a particular interest around behavior change and really understanding what motivates businesses as well as individuals to act more sustainably. And I just wanted to share some information about Business West as well. So as one of the largest chamber of commerce in the UK, Business West works with over 20,000 businesses with the aim of making the Southwest the best place to live and work. We were the first chamber of commerce to become carbon neutral, and we're aiming to be net zero by 2030. Additionally, we became a B Corp in 2021, which is a designation for businesses that demonstrate a high social and environmental performance. But as an organization that works with a range of businesses across the region, developing workshops and resources to help business on their sustainability journey, we really want to ensure that we ourselves are leading by example. We're very much on our carbon reduction journey and continually looking at opportunities to reduce our footprint. And I'll share a little bit about kind of our own journey towards the end of the webinar this morning. Additionally, we're involved in some leadership boards within the region, and that provides us an opportunity to be a voice for our members and other businesses within the region in decision making. And so far, as part of our workshops that we delivered over the last year or so, we've helped over 70 businesses, all SMEs within our region, get started on their carbon reduction journey. At Business West, we run a quarterly economic survey to gain insight from our members and really understand the business health within the region. For one of those quarters, we include questions relating to climate action to really get an understanding from businesses if they're taking any action. In one of our most recent quarterly economic surveys that included climate questions, we asked some businesses around some of the barriers that they're experiencing that are preventing them from taking action. A lot of that was really around the lack of control, whether that's being in a rented accommodation or rented premises, or the challenges of kind of competing priorities, as well as kind of working in a time where a lot of other competing priorities exist for businesses, and many are just trying to really survive during this time. And then we also provide an opportunity for businesses to kind of provide a bit of text in terms of just to provide a bit more explanation in terms of where they are on their journey. Some of these that I've added here on the screen on this slide really reinforce that many businesses are interested in taking action, but are also navigating during a time that's quite challenging for businesses, with many just trying to survive, as I mentioned. However, I do want to highlight that not 100% of businesses are on board just yet. And so these are some of the additional responses that we've received. And so what we're really trying to work and identify within Business West is really trying to understand how we can get more businesses on board and really highlight kind of the importance of taking action and taking progress on their carbon reduction journey. So throughout this webinar, I aim to discuss what some of the motivators, some of the benefits, as well as some of those hooks that can be used to get more people on their carbon reduction journey. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about the climate crisis. I don't want to spend too much on the science because I think we're not really much in the space for discussing that anymore. I think the science continues to reflect how greenhouse gases are having an impact on the planet. But I think it is very important to highlight the why, the purpose of what we're doing, what we're hoping to achieve, and more importantly, what we're trying to avoid. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change stated that it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. Widespread rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere, and biosphere have occurred. Human-induced climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region across the globe. Evidence of this is observed in extremes such as heat waves, heavy precipitation, droughts. The high temperatures we experienced last summer and the wildfires in Spain, Portugal, and Greece are just some examples of the impacts we're currently experiencing and will likely to experience more of in the future. As part of the Paris Agreement, we're aiming to limit the increase in the global temperature to 1.5 degrees warming. As part of the Conference of the Parties, or COP, countries commit their carbon reduction targets that are in line to meet the Paris Agreement target. This is probably one of my personal favorite images and graphics, but it really highlights the fact that we really need some deep action to reduce our carbon emissions going forward. So what this diagram reflects is where all of the commitments that countries have put forward as part of their what are called as part of their commitments, what they've put forward, and how close that brings us to the 1.5 degree agreement or target that we've got as part of the Paris Agreement. What it's saying at the moment that is that effectively most of the targets that countries have in place don't get us to where we need at the moment and are getting us a bit more closer to that 2.4 degrees of warming, which is quite far off from that 1.5 degrees that we have as a target. So it really just reinforces the need for some deep level of decarbonization and a lot more stringent targets to be developed by nations emissions across the world to ensure that we really achieve that 1.5 degrees. But the question is, I guess, where does all of this carbon come from? Here is just a breakdown of global emissions by sector, and it really reflects how energy is quite a big beast to tackle when aiming to reduce our emissions. So that could include transport, energy for industry like food, machinery, iron and steel, as well as the energy that's used in buildings. It also really highlights that this is not an easy issue to tackle and requires some serious action by governments, businesses, as well as individuals to help us reduce our emissions. All right, so I'm conscious that we're using the term net zero quite a lot over these webinars, so I just wanted to make sure that we spent a bit of time to understand really what that term means in a bit more clarity. So the term net zero is defined as reducing your carbon emissions as far as possible, and then using an offset to remove the equivalent amount of carbon remaining from the atmosphere, therefore meaning that your business is no longer adding carbon into the atmosphere. So we've just got a little diagram or a little graphic, which hopefully makes it a little easier to understand. But this graphic really highlights the various different scopes of greenhouse gases that exist within kind of the greenhouse gas accounting space. So we've got scope 1, which are emissions from direct or controlled sources. So that can come from the combustion of fuels, from the generation of electricity, heat, or steam from boilers, or that also incorporates the emissions from any company vehicles. And then we've got scope 2, which looks at emissions that are indirect emissions from the generation of purchased energy that is consumed on site. So it's the emissions that are associated with the electricity that you have purchased and are using on your premises. And then we have scope 3, and scope 3 is the area that has increased in conversations in the last few years as more businesses are looking beyond themselves as an organization and their operations, but more their supply chain and the products and services that they're using. Emissions along the value chain often represent a company's biggest greenhouse gas impacts and can make up to over 50% of a business's carbon footprint. So when looking at net zero and trying to achieve net zero, it's really around making those deep actions for decarbonization across all 3 of your scopes, and then bringing in an offset where there is any residual emissions that you're not able to clear. And so, as I mentioned, what we're starting to see a lot more progress on is the development on action around scope 3, and I'll talk a little bit about that towards in some other slides as well. Okay, so I think it's also very important to talk about what's happening within the government in this space, I think, as well, and what our commitments as a country that exist, that we've got in place. So the Climate Change Act commits the UK government by law to achieve net zero by 2050. It is probably one of the most stringent in the world, but unfortunately, there's currently no demand on business from a legal or regulatory level. In the fall of 2021, the UK government published their net zero strategy, which included ambitions such as having a fully decarbonized energy system by 2035. The government's net zero strategy is a key driver for action as it aims to provide some clarity on the national net zero objective and the steps that are needed to get there. As mentioned, the strategy was released in late 2021, just before COP26 in Glasgow. But in July of 2022, the High Court ruled that the UK government's net zero strategy was unlawful. The court sided with Friends of the Earth and Client Earth as they argue that the strategy doesn't contain the level of funding or detail needed to be aligned with the 2050 net zero target that the UK government has in place. As a result, the independent review of net zero was published in January. following a consultation that was seeking thoughts and inputs from businesses, local authorities, as well as individuals and various different types of organizations. It aimed to better understand the challenges that organizations are facing as they would try to reduce their carbon emissions and identify what government can do to better support organizations and individuals that want to decarbonize. The review produced 129 recommendations for the government to consider when implementing and including in their updated version of the net zero strategy. And so some of these recommendations range from energy efficiency to transport to waste, and more specifically around SME support to really help SMEs that are really trying to get on board on this journey in terms of decarbonization as well. So since then, we have seen the release of an updated version of the net zero strategy. There are also a wide range of documents that were also published by the central government at this time. As part of these documents, they provided additional information as to how they can support SMEs on their carbon reduction journey, which included signposting to the UK Business Climate Hub and the SME Energy Advice Service on their website, which they hope to have up and running by the end of this year. And one of the other things that they've mentioned within their strategy, particularly around businesses and supporting SMEs that are trying to get on this journey, is really around kind of establishing a new partnership with businesses and finance leaders to support the delivery of our net zero target. The development of the net zero business and investment group will provide an opportunity to review and view the market barriers that are being experienced by different sectors across the country that are preventing them from taking action on net zero and climate more widely, and identify the respective roles across government, industry, as well as the finance sector that are needed to help address some of these challenges that businesses are facing. But as I mentioned, as part of their support to SMEs, we're looking for advice on their decarbonization journey. The government is working on delivering an SME energy advice service on their website, which hopefully provide some further resources and advice to support businesses on their journey. As much as the strategy reaffirms the government's commitment to net zero, it is a bit light on detail in terms of how SMEs and businesses will be supported through this transition. Decarbonizing SMEs is an essential step to the UK meeting its net zero commitments. There are about 5.5 million SMEs in the UK across a range of different sectors, from construction to food and restaurants, clothing manufacturers, and many more. The British Business Bank estimates that between 43 to 53% of the UK business emissions are from SMEs, which corresponds to about 36% of the total UK emissions. And as mentioned, there's currently no UK SME-specific decarbonisation plan or support in at the moment. That's some of what they've highlighted in the strategy that was recently released in March, as their aims to provide some more resources towards the end of this year to support businesses on this journey. So what we're finding is a lot of the work that SMEs are doing are being driven by various different other drivers. With soaring energy prices in the last year or so, we've seen an increased interest in businesses that are interested in determining if they're able to generate electricity on site. And we're really using that as an opportunity to discuss other sustainability initiatives and bring them on board in that respect as well. And so I'm personally quite hopeful and optimistic that the future will be low carbon, so that businesses will need to start taking action to adapt to be part of that future. At the moment, I think the drivers for businesses to take action are not necessarily coming from the government, but that doesn't necessarily mean that future regulations won't be implemented. It just means that we're seeing the pressure on businesses coming from elsewhere. What we're slowly starting to notice is that businesses that haven't taken any action are starting to feel a bit more pressure from whether that's from their clients, from the public, or people they're interviewing, for example, who are asking, what actions are you doing? What actions are you taking? And that's maybe some of the interest of why you're here today. I think we're very much at the point where it's more so about future-proofing your business and ensuring that you're prepared for a future that is low carbon and more sustainable, whether that aligns with your personal values or not. So in the simplest of terms, the future is low carbon, whether you want it to be or not. So how are you preparing for what that could look like so you are ahead of any future regulations? So I just wanted to talk about some of the highlights and some of the benefits that we're finding for businesses that are choosing to kind of engage and take action on climate. One of the most kind of common known kind of benefits of this is opportunities for efficiencies and financial savings. So this is probably the most common benefit, as I mentioned, with the implementation of energy efficiency improvements from additional insulation or more efficient equipment. It's likely that they'll result in some sort of financial savings on your heating and electricity bills. Additionally, there is the opportunity to really be taking the lead, be seen as taking the lead on tackling this instead of waiting for any potential regulation or legal requirements to come into effect. And really what we're also starting to see is that growing customer expectations. So according to a McKinsey study, about 76% of people think businesses should have a legal responsibility to the people, to the planet, people alongside maximizing profits. As more individuals are looking to reduce their environmental impact, there's increasing pressure on businesses to provide more sustainable options, as well as taking the stand on reducing their own environmental impact as part of the wider contributor to the problem. So if we're not there already, I think we're almost at the point of where it's kind of not okay to be taking action. And even just speaking from an individual's perspective, some of us want to support businesses and organizations that align with our own personal values. And the collective purchase power we have can potentially encourage businesses to take action as well. This is just an example of some really cool and innovative decarbonization solutions that has happened locally, and some people might be aware of this already. So you might have heard about the swimming pool in Devon that is being heated by an on-site on-site data center, or what they're calling a digital boiler. So the leisure center is getting effectively free heating in exchange for providing a space to data center equipment, which is roughly the size of a home kitchen appliance. The data center is submerged in mineral oil, which captures the heat from the processors. This heat is then transferred to the swimming pool through the heat exchanger. As a result, the leisure center has seen a 62% drop in the amount of gas needed to heat the pool, cutting their bills by about £20,000 a year. And this is just really a really cool example of the innovation and collaboration that's really needed going forward, and how businesses can be really part of leading the way going forward as well. And then just a few other benefits that I wanted to highlight as well. So by acting now and taking action on your carbon emissions, it really opens up the opportunity to consider other business initiatives, whether that's the Sustainable Development Goals or even B Corp, which is really increasing in popularity in the last few years. Another one that we're really starting to see more of is meeting expanding procurement requirements. So increasingly, there's a need for businesses to have net zero plans when bidding for new work. So for example, in June of 2021, the UK government announced their public procurement notice requiring all companies and organizations who apply for central government contracts would need to demonstrate their alignment with the government's 2050 net zero target. So what we're starting to see is this trend is a bit more common with local governments as well, with universities, as well as the NHS. If you're interested in hearing a bit more information, some further information along on this, please do come along to our third webinar in the series, where we discuss how working towards net zero and having a plan to reduce your carbon emissions can impact your business's ability to win and retain work in the future. That webinar will be on the 27th of June, and we'll show how you can prepare your business for growing procurement requirements that are likely to come down the line. And lastly, one of the areas that we're starting to see a lot more kind of action is employees seeking proactive employers. Increasingly, more people want to work for organizations that are doing great things and align with their own personal values. About 70% of employees now demand purposeful work. And according to a 2021 study, these purpose-driven employees are 6 times more likely to stay at a company. There's a growing interest in employees applying and accepting roles for companies that are environmentally sustainable. And from speaking to some businesses, we're finding that a lot more people are going into interviews and asking what that organization is doing on sustainability, as well as wider environmental and social issues as well. Despite all those benefits, it is recognized that this is not very much an easy or straightforward process. And there's an increasing number of opportunities for support for businesses that do want to get started, but aren't exactly entirely sure how and where to get started. And often the first step is really understanding kind of where your business is emitting carbon and developing your carbon footprint. And moving on, kind of related, but I kind of just wanted to show an example of a business that is taking action around their Scope 3 emissions. So HP is an example of many organizations that are taking a closer look at their Scope 3 emissions and have developed some commitments around it to reduce it. They are working with CDP, formerly known as Carbon Disclosure Project, to address some of their challenges within their supply chain. The biggest area of focus is on the energy performance of their products. The company is aiming to improve that with the aim that by 2025, it can improve the energy performance by 30 times when compared to 2015 levels. They have also kind of set an active goal of reducing carbon emissions along their supply chain and with some of the suppliers that they are working with. So they've said as part of that, they've clearly stated that by 2025, 80% of their manufacturing spend will go to suppliers with science-based targets in place. And this really creates that long-term commercial investment for suppliers to set their own carbon reduction targets. This again is just an example of one organization that's using their purchasing power to really influence change within the other companies that they are working with. And so we're slowly starting to see this trickle down the supply chain a bit more. This really reinforces how businesses can should begin preparing for these potential requests for carbon data, as well as providing proof of their carbon reduction plans. So, as I mentioned, having a clear and concise carbon reduction plan or net zero strategy provides a clear indication of your business's commitment to reduce their environmental impacts. Over the next few slides, I'll go through a bit of a template that we've put together here at Business West to help you think about what information you should include within your plan, as well as help you identify some of those actions to get you started on your journey. So one of the most important things with developing your plan is really trying to identify and develop your carbon footprint. Your plan, you're developing your carbon footprint is the essential first step to developing your plan. It really helps to identify where your largest sources of emissions are as an organization and helps you identify some of those key actions that can be taken to get those deep level of decarbonization across your organization. And then it's about kind of determining what that target is that you will be putting in place. So is that net zero by 2030, by 2040, and what are some of the initiatives that you plan to implement to help you get on that journey? So this first page here is just very much the opportunity to identify your overall commitment as an organization to reduce your carbon emissions and how the importance of sustainability is very much embedded in what you're doing as an organization and how you've aligned with other frameworks to help develop some of your actions as well. So that could be Business Declares or the Bristol Climate Ask, which is really supporting businesses that have made a climate or a carbon reduction commitment. And as I mentioned, one of the most important pieces of this work is really identifying where those sources of emissions are coming from. So as part of this template that we've put together here, it's really breaking down kind of the sources of emissions and the quantity of emissions across those various different 3 scopes that I mentioned earlier. So using this template helps you identify and break down in a bit more detail in terms of what your emissions are for those 3 different scopes and what tools you have been using and what methodologies you've been using to help you put together your footprint as well. And then another essential piece of this is identifying what your baseline year is. So what's the year that you're going to you'll be using to compare your reductions against. For us at Business West, we chose 2019-2020 as our baseline year. So all of the reductions that we are making are being compared against our emissions that we reported in 2019-2020. And then an integral piece of your plan is those steps that will help you get to net zero or whatever your carbon reduction target is. So are there activities that you're looking at? What are the activities that you're looking at kind of in the next 12 months, 5 years, 10 years to really help you get on your carbon reduction journey and help you achieve your respective carbon reduction target as well? And this really just highlights the emphasis and the importance of having short, medium, as well as long-term goals to help you achieve your overall net zero or carbon reduction objective as your organization. And then, yeah, again, this just really reemphasizes kind of what you're doing as an organization and how you plan to kind of keep up to date with the work that you're doing and how this aligns with any other commitments that you might be doing as an organization. So just to kind of recap in terms of developing your carbon reduction plan, the most important and critical step is really to develop your carbon footprint and identify where your sources of emissions are coming from. Before that, a lot of you probably be making a lot of assumptions in terms of where your emissions are coming from, and having a clear and kind of well put together carbon footprint really helps to identify the areas that you should be focusing on as an organization, as well as identifying some of those areas within potentially your scope 3 emissions as well that you can be targeting, and some of the suppliers that you can be working more closely with to get that level of decarbonization within your scope 3 emissions. But I do just want to share a bit of kind of an example of kind of the work that we're doing here at Business West. As an organization that bids for contracts for central government work, we have to evidence the work that we're doing to align with the UK's net zero target. So as I mentioned, we're one of the largest Chamber of Commerce in the UK, and we became carbon neutral a few years ago, and we are working to be net zero by 2030. We have 2 premises that are one located in Bristol and one in Swindon, both of which are listed buildings. And so there's some kind of challenges that exist around energy efficiency improvements for both of our buildings due to the fact they're listed buildings, and we're really trying to identify and work alongside the council to identify some opportunities for energy efficiency improvements that are in line in keeping with kind of the requirements of a listed building. And as part of that, we're really keen to be able to, as I mentioned, by leading by example, we're really quite keen to share some of our experiences as we go and navigate through our carbon reduction journey as well. So as I mentioned, as part of our strategy, we've been looking at our emissions for the last few years. And so 2019, 2020 is our baseline year, as I mentioned previously. This just really highlights kind of our emissions over the last few years and kind of what we're forecasting for the next few years, and hopefully will get us to net zero by 2030. But our net zero strategy or carbon reduction strategy is on our website, which provides information in terms of the steps that we've taken already to help us get to where we are in terms of our reductions, but some of the future opportunities that we're looking at to really help us get to that net zero target by 2030. So a lot of the work that we've done is really around some of our buildings. So whether that's around light sensors in some of the communal areas, we've got electric vehicle charge points installed at both of our sites. And we recently created a sustainable procurement guide to really reduce the emissions that are associated with our supply chain. And going forward, we're really keen to investigate kind of the potential for solar at our site at Lee Court, and really working quite closely with the council to identify what are how feasible that might be for our location. But I do think it's really important to highlight the progress that's being made and has been made, and that businesses some businesses are really choosing to be at the forefront of this movement. Also to highlight that local authorities and councils have really been quite progressive in terms of some of the commitments that they've put through as well. Most local authorities in the Southwest have set a net zero target, many of which are trying to achieve net zero by 2030, and they will increasingly use their local powers to limit carbon emissions. Bristol City Elite Project is one of the first in the world, where the city is working with the US energy services company Ameresco and the Swedish heat network subcontractor to help Bristol deliver its net zero commitments. And then looking at businesses and corporate action, more and more businesses are taking action and are really at the kind of the stages of figuring out how they can do more to tackle their emissions and work more collaboratively with others within their sector as well. But at the heart of it is us as individuals. As I mentioned earlier, we're starting to see more individuals becoming more increasingly passionate about being more sustainable and putting more pressure on businesses and governments that to take action. Climate marches over the past few years have kind of demonstrated the widespread support and the desire for more to be done to support to really achieve our net zero targets. More and more people are really wanting to take those steps to reduce their own carbon emissions. And really, really take those next steps and be more thoughtful in terms of the businesses that they're choosing to support to help align with their own personal objectives and values as well. All right, so that brings me to the end. So as I mentioned, the steps that businesses can take is very much around future-proofing them for a future that is low carbon. The argument about future-proofing is based on the idea that making changes early, SME owners and managers will be better placed to respond to any subsequent changes in the market and future regulations. So my suggestion is get started. It can be daunting and challenging to know where to get started, but there are a number of resources, including Business West, that are here to support you on that journey. I appreciate that this is very much a whistle-stop tour, but I'm happy to kind of take any questions. I'm also happy to have a chat afterwards if people are interested as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. I have a set of questions from people coming in now, and more are appearing all the time. I'm going to start with one that's come in twice. From Dane Wadsworth and an anonymous attendee, which is around the difference between net zero and carbon neutral. So I'll read Dane's out because it's slightly longer. So hi there, with your net zero definition, a lot of companies are being asked to be carbon neutral via the likes of PAS 2060, which I'm assuming is one of our standards. Would you argue that net zero is more important than carbon neutrality, and how would you define carbon neutral? And the other question is that definition difference between carbon neutral and net zero. So over to you.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think, so just a bit of context. So carbon neutral was kind of the first term that came around, and that was kind of the most readily and the one that was used most often. What we're starting to see a lot more of is the merging of both of those terms together to mean very similar things. So effectively, they are becoming very similar terms. So what was once carbon neutral is really encouraging that deep level of decarbonization. sorry, hopefully that makes sense. So, but what historically, what carbon neutral meant is that you could do some level of decarbonization within your organization. You could, implement some energy efficiency measures, do a little bit of work, and then use an offset to get you to the remainder amount to get so you're no longer emitting, or you're essentially carbon neutral at a point. Where net zero came into play, it was really encouraging that deep level of decarbonization across all three of your scopes. To ensure that you are doing the most amount of work possible, and then bringing in that offset if you needed it, and that was that last resort if possible. What we're saying now is we're not in the space to be doing a little bit anymore. We're in the space of being able to really encourage that deep level of decarbonization. So I think there's a lot more of a concerted effort to kind of bring those terms together to really mean a very similar thing, which is effectively to be decarbonizing as much as you can within your organization. And that offset is that final bit of to get you over the line if needed. That is, yeah, if needed. There is a lot of controversy around offsets, just to kind of flag that overall. But the idea is that whether you're, as an organization, you really should be looking at opportunities that will encourage that deep level decarbonization across all three of your scopes, particularly around your scope 3, which is more challenging. I hope that answers your question. I hope that's helpful.
We'll let either of our questioners put another one in the chat if it doesn't.
Okay.
So I've got, again, a couple of questions around scopes 1, 2 and 3. So as a business, we do our bit on scope 1 and 2. Scope 3 seems impossible to achieve, especially when we're dealing with third-party suppliers. What are your best tips?
Yeah, that is a very good question. And we're working with a lot of businesses that are just getting started to kind of rack their brain around getting data. Getting data is probably around your scope 3 emissions is probably the most challenging bit, because you're relying on your suppliers to provide that information. My recommendation is start small. So there are 16 different categories included within your scope 3 emissions. You're not required to do all of them. Some of them won't apply to you as your organization. So start with one, and just that would be my first recommendation. Find the one that's easiest for you. And for some organization, that it could be around the waste operations. There's a category around kind of the waste that you produce as an organization. You have a bit more opportunity to get that information, whether that's through your waste management company that you work with, or you have that information kind of on file within kind of the bills that you pay to them. But yeah, my recommendation is really around starting small. Just a bit of promo. So Business West, I'm delivering a workshop next week around tackling your scope 3 emissions. So we'll look a bit more in depth and detail in terms of how you can get some of that information across some of those different categories, and how you really can get started, because it is quite definitely daunting, and a lot of it is around just getting access to that data, which is challenging for most businesses.
Lovely, thank you. We've got a couple of questions around sort of government and legal, which are sort of in the same box, which is when do you think government will enforce big corporates and SMEs to publish net zero strategies, things like dealing with the NHS? And I think the NHS might be in, but I'll let you tell us more. And a similar question from Emma Burnham about are there legal requirements at all currently for SMEs, and if not, when do we expect them in, which is sort of the same thing from government and from a legal perspective. So
so they're legally, SMEs are not required to do anything at this moment. So a lot of the work that they're doing is either being driven from their own kind of personal values, or they've identified some of those benefits from taking action, or it might be coming from another one of their clients that they're working with that's driving a lot of the work that they're doing. In terms of when to anticipate that, I think that's a very good question. In all honesty, if I'm being completely honest, I'm not too sure. I would hope that will come in sooner rather than later. I would hope. I think the government's plans, as they've kind of articulated it within the most recent version of their strategy, is that they're really looking at developing some resources around supporting businesses, and developing a bit more of a task force to identify some of those challenges that businesses are facing. So I would hope that something would come in place. But I think what we're finding is that that pressure is not going to necessarily come from government at this moment. So it's really utilizing some of the purchasing power that some of the larger organizations have to really enforce that within their supply chain, is what we're really starting to see a bit more of.
Lovely. We've also got government restructure recently, haven't we? Net zero department is there's a new department around that, and obviously we've got a general election coming up. So
Yeah, that's
in
very
one
true.
sense, who knows what the answer to policy will be in a year, 18 months time.
Very true. Yeah.
Couple of other questions coming in now. Will future sessions describe in more detail the processes and tools to start the journey? I think there's probably a big yes on that one.
Yes. Yes.
So what have we got coming up? We've got.
Yes, so we've got, as part of the Innovating for Net Zero kind of series, next week we've got one on sustainable finance. The following week we'll look at winning and retaining business for growth. So really looking at a bit more specific detail in terms of how you can prepare yourself as an organization, as a business, to supply data and information up to organizations that you're bidding or tendering for. And then the last session will look at a bit more detail in terms of how are you communicating some of the sustainability ambitions that you have as an organization out to members of the public, to your shareholders, and just kind of not being kind of at risk to any kind of greenwashing claims as well. But we do have some other workshops as part of our training to net zero support that's provided as part of Business West that does provide a bit more opportunities to identify some tools to get you started on your journey as well, which we can happy to talk more about offline.
Lovely. I've got a question from Sandy, which aligns quite nicely with that. Are there or will there be any financial support available for SMEs to have carbon audits of their premises so they know where to start? So in one sense, we've got the webinar series, which is a starting point for SMEs, but is there other funding or financial support out there that you're aware of?
Yeah, so there are some grants and support that exists. So, for example, the West of England Combined Authority, they have their green business grants, and as part of that, businesses are able to access a free carbon survey. So someone will come around to their premises and identify to kind of do a bit of a walkthrough of their premises to identify where there are opportunities for reduction. So that does exist, and I'm happy to talk more about kind of what support might be available locally to where your business might be located and identify some support there.
Lovely, thank you. Sandy's very quickly come back and said, could we put a link in the chat? So if we have a chance to do that, we'll put a link in the chat for you.
Okay. Okay.
I've got at least 2 more questions in at the moment. So Dane has come back to us. Do you think the greenhouse gas protocol goes far enough given Scope 3 isn't mandated? What other standards would you suggest?
Oh, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. Do you mind repeating that, if that's okay? Just to make sure I understood.
Let me just... Right, so do you think the greenhouse gas protocol goes far enough given Scope 3 isn't mandated? What other standards would you suggest?
That's a really good question. I'm not too sure, to be honest. I think there is a lot of work around reviewing kind of the greenhouse gas protocol as an entity in itself, to identify how it can be a bit more, I guess, stringent, and really encourage that deep level of decarbonization across all of your scopes. I think I guess in terms of others, I would suggest is around, so there's a science-based targets initiative. So that's an organization, so science-based target initiative. They work alongside businesses to help them develop science-based targets that align with the science and align with the Paris Agreement. So as part of that kind of support that you get as part of the project, they really help you identify where there are opportunities for deep level decarbonization across all of your scopes to ensure that you are achieving a target that is aligned and realistic for you as an organization, but is in line with the Paris Agreement goal as well. So I would definitely recommend kind of looking into the SBTI or Science-Based Target Initiative to help support with that.
I'm sure British standards have some standards around environmental management. I just can't remember the number of it at the moment.
Oh yeah.
So we can put a little bit of information in the email that comes out following this event. Sandy will also put the link to the scheme that Aisha was talking about in the email afterwards, so we don't have to try to find it live. What else have I got question wise? Oh, this is quite a nice one. What is the best behavioural change you have seen from companies when they're sitting down and planning for change?
Behavioral change. That's a really good question. That's a really good question.
Whilst you think,
Yeah.
I'm just about out of questions. So if anyone has any last minute thoughts, now is your opportunity to ping them into the Q&A for me.
Okay. The best behavior.
I'll continue to give you some thinking time.
Okay, thank you.
I think one more has just come in, so
okay.
I've got at least one more question while Aisha thinks about behavior change that she has seen in some of the companies she's working with.
That's a really good question. I think kind of the biggest space that we've seen some changes is just kind of that mindset change. I think for a lot of organizations, I think they're slowly starting to realize the importance of it. So it's not necessarily kind of them becoming green-fingered and wanting to plant all the trees, but they're really starting to really see and understand the benefits that come from them as an organization to choosing to take on some carbon reduction measures. So I think that's not necessarily kind of a massive shift in behavior, but I think that shift in mindset, I think, has been a significant one that we're starting to see a lot more of. And I'm having less and less conversation in terms of why businesses should be doing this and kind of challenging some of the science. We're more in the space of now, okay, this is happening. The future is low carbon. How can I prepare for my organization to be ready for that? So I think it's largely around, at the moment, at least with the businesses that I'm working on, they're still very much at the early stages of their journey. So they're still trying to identify how can this be integrated within the organization. So at the moment, it's one person as an organization that's working on it, whether that's their MD, their office manager, whoever it may be, but it's looking at how can you integrate that across your whole organization to make sure that you're considering it from a procurement perspective, from a HR perspective. It's really about kind of how are you implementing that and across your whole organization is what we're starting to see a bit more of.
Absolutely. And I've just had a note come in the chat saying from Joy saying mindset is so important with everything we do as a person or as a business. And I would agree with you. I think that mindset has shifted recently from why are we doing this to we must do it. How do we do it? So I think that's interesting that you're seeing that in the companies you're doing. I've had a question coming from Emma. Is there anywhere where you can find the different scopes and their categories broken down?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to do a little pitch, but we've got our understanding or developing your carbon footprint workshop, and that will be happening in July. But we can send a resource out, which is the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, but we'll also send some other resources to help to identify kind of what's included within each of those different scopes. So I'm happy to have that conversation, but we'll also share some resources to help you identify what information goes in each scope, what's included in each scope.
Lovely, thank you for that. We've got a British standards expert on the call. So Environmental Management System BSEN ISO 14001 is the one that helps businesses of all sizes and sectors look at sustainability and how they can save money, improve their reputation, and engage employees. So there we go. So that was the ISO. I knew there was one, I just couldn't remember the number live on call. So hopefully that's a good one for people to have a look at if they're serious about following a standard route to this. So I think we're pretty much in the final bit of the session. I've got one more question coming in around. I'm just trying to. I'll read it live. There is increasing regulation supporting businesses who are attempting to achieve net zero. What advice would you give to those who are reticent around the commercial benefits of moving towards net zero within their business?
Sorry, you mind repeating the last bit? Sorry.
What advice would you give to those who are reticent around the commercial benefits of moving towards net zero within their business?
I think that's a very valid point. I think we're starting to hear that a bit within some of the businesses that we're working with, particularly around when businesses are looking at their scope 3 emissions and trying to identify how you can work with other businesses within your supply chain that might be potentially a bit more expensive potentially than the ones that you're working with, but have that carbon reduction kind of ambition that you're looking for in terms of your in terms of kind of aligning with your own company's objectives. I think that it is a challenge, and I think it's really just trying to highlight and reemphasize the importance of what you're trying to do, and especially as an organization that's choosing to kind of hopefully kind of communicate what you're doing kind of publicly within kind of the public, within your shareholders as well, or even kind of people that are coming in and speaking to you. I think being quite confident in terms of that, and reaffirming kind of the importance that the carbon reductions and your carbon reduction plan and your target has an organization, it will be an important piece. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm answering it directly, but I think there are going to be some kind of commercial kind of trade-offs, I think, unfortunately, as a result.
I think I'd agree there's some initial commercial trade-offs, but from what we've been talking about today, there's a mindset shift within business, but there's a mindset shift within society as well. Actually, some of the events we've got coming up, communicating your message and your culture, and how you do your recruitment and keep your staff. I mean, you mentioned at the very outset that, people now only want to work, 70% of people want to work for businesses that have this as part of their DNA. Yeah. So actually, if you're reticent around this commercially, in the future, if you don't make these steps, you won't be able to recruit the staff you need. You won't be able to take your products out to customers because they won't buy from you because you haven't got your net zero sort of badge. And I can sort of see that, and I know we talk about some of this in some of the upcoming ones about, how we win and retain business when the legislation starts to push to say you have to. So the NHS procurement, for example, and we'll touch on that in a future event. And that communicating your message so that customers will continue to buy from you, and how you undertake recruitment to continue to keep your staff. These will become commercial imperatives if you haven't done it, in my view. So actually, short term, maybe there is a commercial reticence, but actually medium to long term, if you don't do this, you'll be in trouble. So I think you can, in one sense, you can flip it around the other way. Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's a good absolutely. I would say, in terms of finding out more about this is webinar 1 of a series of 4. So come back and have a look at the other 3. If you haven't signed up for them already, I think we've got details of those a little bit later. Aisha, we've run out of time for questions, so we will ping some stuff in the email that follows this, some of the links and things we've promised, and I know some of the strategies were put in the chat earlier on in the session as we were going through, if people want to follow up on those. So it's down to me now just to say a very big thank you to you, Aisha, for giving us that run through. I'm looking forward to hearing more next week and the following weeks after that. So if anyone on call requires more support around what you've heard today, do drop Business West an email, and we can get back in touch with you. We'd be very happy to help support you in your journey to net zero. And as we've mentioned many times, this is one of a 4-part series. So you will benefit from watching all of them. The 2 on screen and the next 2 up and coming. So we're looking around sustainable finance and how you win and retain business for growth. So more on net zero, those topics, and how you look at your sort of communicating your message, culture and recruitment upcoming too. So next Tuesday, we will be exploring that sustainable finance one. Do join us. It'll be looking at the benefits for both the planet and your business. You can sign up with the little QR code sat at the bottom of the screen currently, or you can go to businesswest.co.uk/events. Finally, thank you again, Aisha, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. We hope to see you again next week for more Innovating to Net Zero. Have a very good morning. Thank you.